Hi everyone, my name is Lovely Bang, and welcome to my presentation on childhood exposure to manganese in drinking water associated with effects on neurodevelopment. To begin, access to clean drinking water is critical for human survival. This is because one can only survive without water for a short period of time, and water is really important for our physiological functioning. Contamination of drinking water is an ongoing issue worldwide that poses serious health concerns. Toxic metals are often present in drinking water, especially found in groundwater sources. And also, early life exposure to toxic metals can cause lifelong consequences on overall development. Moving on to current problem statement. To introduce manganese, it is a mineral present in the crust, water, and soils of the earth. The primary route of manganese exposure is by ingesting contaminated drinking water. Children are one of the most vulnerable group to contaminated water, and chronic manganese exposure leads to neurodevelopmental deficiency in children. This is due to the excess manganese that disrupts the catecholamine activity in the brain, leading to attentional impairments, as it also accumulates in the brain areas that involve dopamine. Um, when the brain is disrupted, this could cause improper neural signaling of the brain, which alters the brain's function. Then it impairs cognitive and motor function. So, some of the symptoms of manganese exposure in children include reduced IQ, impaired memory, attention deficient, hyperactivity, and behavioral problems. Um, Moving on to results. So, in one of the studies, it was found that about 67% of water samples were below threshold levels. However, nearly all waterworks had spikes above 5 micrograms per liter. Um, they also found that about 20% of children were exposed to manganese levels above 100 micrograms per liter in the first 5 years of life. And this is really important because during the first 5 years of life, this is when children are beginning to barely develop their brain and their immune system. So, in a study with 142 rural Bangladeshi children, who had long-term exposure to drinking water from too well had an association with neurotoxic effects. Okay, so some more results, but now regarding cognitive and behavioral health outcome in correlation with hair biomarker. So it was also found that manganese water exposure increases children's risk of getting ADHD and attentive subtype. This ADHD subtype is more about difficulty in focusing in children rather than hyperactivity. Prenatal and early life exposure affected boys and girls differently. So boys had scored lower cognitive scores compared to girls. It was also found that children had an 8% reduction in memory performance compared to those with lower manganese exposures. Analysis reveals a positive association between manganese exposure and internalized and externalized behaviors. Internalized meaning anxiety and depression behaviors, externalized meaning attention deficient and aggression behaviors. Now, children's hair was used to assess manganese exposure. Across 5 studies, hair manganese was able to evaluate neurological outcomes in relation to low IQ. Elevated manganese levels in children's hair were consistently associated with poor neurodevelopmental outcomes, specifically reduced IQ scores, impaired learning and memory performance, and perceptual reasoning, while also increasing hyperactive and oppositional behaviors. Moving on to discussions, results shows that there is a relationship between childhood manganese exposure and neurodevelopmental outcomes. Multiple studies presented that manganese exposure is linked to cognitive and behavioral impairments. Cognitively, um, meaning ADHD, reduced IQ, impaired memory, and learning. Manganese exposure does not simply interfere with only children's academic and learning abilities, but also their social and emotional development. Um, Gender or sex specific effects highlight the neurotoxicity of manganese and how vulnerability may differ between males and females. As I mentioned earlier, boys scored lower cognitive scores compared to girls. And here also served as a reliable indicator of manganese exposure and its neurotoxic effects. Despite strong evidence, limitations do apply. For instance, water is exposed to many other toxic metals, which makes it hard to isolate manganese itself. And sample sizes also differ between the studies, which may not represent a larger population. So, to conclude, manganese contamination in drinking water poses a serious threat to children's neurodevelopment, especially long term exposures. And exposures during early childhood can disrupt the brain's development, leading to neurological concerns. Findings highlight the urgent need to regulate manganese levels in drinking water and implement preventive measures to safeguard children. And these are my references. Thank you for listening.